Thank you, Conference Director, and to all the delegates. Privilege and honor for me to deliver this first keynote address, deliver one of the keynote addresses at the first Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation Africa Summit in South Africa. I tried to do this about 5 years ago, couldn't get the funding together, so I'm so grateful to God, to Dr. Antoinette Besson, to people that I look up to, like, you know, in the work I do at Family Policy Institute, I need inspiration and I need encouragement, and most of you do, right? And people like Marcel van der Walt provides that inspiration and encouragement. People like Mickey Meji sitting up there, since the time I've met her, she's never ceased to be an inspiration to me. People like Dawn Hawkins and Sharon Slater of Family Watch International. I've attended many of their functions and international conferences, and I thank God for them, and I thank God for the work that they do. So I want to greet you all this morning on behalf of my wife and I, my wife Arlene, in which I do nothing without. I can do nothing without. It's my best friend, travels. We travel all over the world together. We do our work together. She's my greatest encourager, my advisor, my closest confidant. She does my editing, sometimes camera work. She can do all things, this woman. So I thank God for this woman. A gathering of this magnitude that brings together global expertise in the fight against sexual exploitation, abuse, the harms of pornography and prostitution, sex trafficking, gender-based violence, and child abuse is desperately needed and long overdue on the continent of Africa. That's why I'm deeply grateful to Dr. Antoinette Besson and the Bureau of Market Research here at UNISA for hosting this event in partnership with Dr. Marcel van der Walt of CESE Africa and US partners, Dawn Hawkins of the International Coalition on Sexual Exploitation, and Sharon Slater of Family Watch International. The timing of the summit is critical. Tragically, post-apartheid South Africa is now known as Femi Nation because of the spiraling rates of femicide, gender-based violence, rape, sexual exploitation and abuse of women and children. In fact, a woman is killed every 3 hours in South Africa. That's what the current stats show us. I was compelled to get involved in the fight against sexual exploitation in 2009 when pro-prostitution groups lobbied government to decriminalize the entire sex industry in South Africa in time for the FIFA World Cup, the Soccer World Cup tournament in 2010. The then National Police Commissioner, Jackie Celebi, agreed with the groups, and he argued, I quote, this is what he said, it was reported in the media, decriminalizing prostitution would free up the police to fight real crime, end quote. We partnered with many courageous and exceptional women to create public awareness about the real dangers of a decriminalized sex industry in South Africa. FPI, or Family Policy Institute, for short FPI, compiled a research document entitled Why Prostitution Must Not Be Legalized or Decriminalized in South Africa. This document helped many understand that prostitution remains violence against women, whether legal or illegal. FPI's submission on prostitution law reform to the South African Law Reform Commission was endorsed by several prominent organizations and hundreds of South African citizens. FPI's proposals were quoted extensively in the Commission's final report on prostitution law reform. We also lobbied aggressively for the swift passing of anti-trafficking laws and led a national public campaign against a satellite TV provider that planned to launch 3 24-hour porn channels in South Africa. How many of you know that it was a company or a provider, satellite TV provider a few years ago that wanted to put 3 24-hour porn channels on South African TV? We fought that tooth and nail along with our allies. And thankfully, we won that battle. And that top TV, they were known, that channel was bankrupted. South Africans observed Women's Month this past August to celebrate the indispensable roles of women in society. Sadly, however, the appalling gang rape of 8 women at a video shoot in Krugersdorp and the hacking to death of 2 schoolgirls in KZN marred these celebrations. Prosecution statistics for these atrocities are equally horrendous. Only between 5 and 8% of violent crimes against women and children are successfully prosecuted in South Africa, despite government's repeated claims that the fight against gender-based violence is a national priority. A recent Daily Maverick headline tragically reminds us women and children remain the most vulnerable members of South African society. The headline reads, "Crime crisis continues in first quarter of 2022 with women and children worst affected." The article continues, I quote, "At least 6,083 people were murdered in South Africa between January and March 2022. That's an average of 67 murders per day. That's 67 people are murdered in South Africa every day. That's more than Ukraine. And there's a war raging there. This represents an increase of 22%, or 1,107 more people murdered compared to the same period last year. Alarmingly, increases in reports of children and women being murdered have shot up by 37.2% and 70.5% respectively. Women and children shot up. Children 37.2 and women 70.5. So most of the people, the 67 people murdered in South Africa every day, most of that are women. It also reported 11,000 rapes in the period January to March 2022, this year. The criminal justice system and the South African police service are failing women and children in this country miserably as violent crime persists. Government's typical response is to allocate more funding to the fight against gender-based violence. However, the South African Police Service's forensic labs currently have a backlog of over 200,000 cases that ensures thousands of cases of rape against women and children will not ever see justice. So you see, money alone cannot solve the issues we're grappling with without first understanding the root causes of crimes against women and what drives gender-based violence, sexual exploitation, and abuse. Our president, South African President, Cyril Ramaphosa, often refers to the violent crimes against women as the second pandemic in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. Government allocated billions to the fight against the COVID-19 crisis and enacted draconian regulations to, and I quote, save lives. The COVID-19 pandemic has largely subsided, but the gender-based violence pandemic remains rampant. Sadly, however, the authorities have not demonstrated the same level of commitment to the gender-based violence pandemic as it has the COVID-19 pandemic, despite numerous promises. Inexplicably, as violent crimes against women in South Africa persist, the Department of Justice is engaging stakeholders right now on proposed policy options to decriminalize what it calls sex work. An extreme policy justified under the guise of promoting human rights and equality. But while the Justice Department is proposing decriminalized prostitution or decriminalizing the sex trade, right now in Cape Town, where I live, 2 men and a woman on trial for running a sex trafficking ring in Brooklyn. They targeted the desperate, the unemployed or drug addicted, as well as teenagers. A woman rescued by the Walks testified that she never saw a cent of the money she earned, only getting free heroin between clients. Sounds familiar? Shockingly, these are the people our government want to decriminalize and want to legitimize. Research shows the links between prostitution and organized crime are never broken, never ever broken, even when the sex trade is decriminalized or legalized. Research also indicates the sex trade is one of the most mercilessly exploitative, abusive, and violent industries in the world. Pimps, brothel owners, and crime syndicates typically prey on the desperate plight of vulnerable women and children for self-enrichment. Despite this, the Gender Equality Commission, a Chapter 9 institution established to advance social equity for women in South Africa, welcomed the news of state-sanctioned sexual slavery. No surprise then that during the Commission's tenure, equality for women deteriorated in South Africa. Julie Bindel, an activist and an author of Abolishing the Sex Work Myth, says, and I quote, "Prostitution is inherently abusive and a cause and a consequence of women's equality," end quote. The South African Law Reform Commission conducted a comprehensive 9-year investigation into prostitution law reform. The final report warned against decriminalizing prostitution because of the already high rates of gender-based violence, poverty, and unemployment of women in South Africa. Today, that very Justice Department that commissioned that investigation ignores its expert findings to validate a slave trade devastating to women, children, and society. Furthermore, what President Ramaphosa failed to acknowledge is the pornography pandemic. The porn pandemic fuels the gender-based violence pandemic. Somebody said, pornography is prostitution for mass consumption. Its objectives are the same: to promote the destructive lie that women exist primarily for the sexual gratification of men. That's porn's core message. Mountains of evidence prove that easy access to online pornography fuels the social degradation of women and children. Pornography is the theory, rape is the practice. The porn pandemic fuels the sexual exploitation pandemic inherent in prostitution. This in turn drives the gender-based violence pandemic that ultimately results in the femicide pandemic that South Africa is going through. The COVID-19 pandemic killed over 100,000 citizens in South Africa. But the question is, how many women and children die daily from the silent pandemics, not often acknowledged? The COVID-19 crisis brought the entire nation to a standstill because of the risks faced by about 2% of the population. Tragically, more than 50% of South Africa's population face serious risks every day without similar drastic interventions being implemented. Child-on-child sexual abuse is escalating because of easy access to hardcore online pornography. Addictions to pornography are escalating unchecked. Younger children are increasingly exposed to hardcore pornography that promote distorted views of women. An article quoting the Bureau of Market Research on porn addiction amongst children reveals about 55% of South African children regularly view pornography online, with at least 10% watching it every day. South African Police Service latest crime stats indicate there were 53 rapes at primary and high schools in South Africa between January 1 and March 31. One of these rapes was at a creche. Clinical psychologist Marita Rademeyer backed up these findings saying, and I quote, "Children as young as 5 were addicted to pornography and masturbate daily. By the time children have left primary school, up to 90% of them have already been exposed to pornography. In more than 40% of cases where children have been sexually abused, including having been raped, the perpetrators are other children. This is so-called child-on-child sexual abuse. The scourge of family breakdown and fatherless homes have left millions of children without purpose and direction, and therefore vulnerable to exploitation. Essentially, the values of a loving, stable family have been replaced by the survival instincts of the streets. Despite state officials repeatedly declaring, we need African solutions for African problems, the South African Department of Education imported a wholly foreign devised sexuality education program called Comprehensive Sexuality Education, or CSE, which several respected international research institutions evaluated as harmful sexual indoctrination. Despite wildly exaggerated claims about the benefits of CSE, which include, I quote, helping children make informed choices about their sexuality, end quote, teen pregnancies have exploded in South Africa to over 500,000. During the 5-year period, CSE was piloted in the South African schooling system. Child pregnancy rates increased dramatically in South Africa. And this graph illustrates this. These figures indicate teenage pregnancies in the age group 10 to 19 years old. 2017, 86,000, more than 86,000. 2018, it shot up to 123,678. In 2019, 129,000. In 2020, 136,386. We only have the stats for 2021 for the first quarter, and that's already at 36,262. We have a major problem in this country. Tragically, girls in these age groups appear to be the most vulnerable in South Africa. Rape, abuse, and HIV/AIDS infections are also highest amongst teenage girls. What we are witnessing in society today is society reaping the moral devastation of government's harmful sexual rights policies. The shocking fact that 14,176 girls aged 10 to 14 years old fell pregnant in 4 years in South Africa. That's 10-year-old girls falling pregnant in South Africa. There's almost 15,000 of them already. This reveals a devastating moral crisis in South Africa. Family breakdown is the root of the problem. Millions of children receive little or no moral guidance or values in the home or school. The World Family Declaration proclaims this, and I quote, "The family, a universal community based on the marital union of a man and a woman, is the bedrock of society, the strength of nations, and the hope of humanity. As the ultimate foundation of every civilization known to history, the family is the proven bulwark of liberty and the key to development, prosperity, and peace. The family is also the fountain and cradle of new life, the natural refuge for children, and the first and foremost school to teach the values necessary for the well-being of children and society. The family truly is our link to the past and our bridge to the future," end quote. Intact, stable families are the natural protective environment for women and children. As families break down, women and children are rendered vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. Most women in prostitution come from broken homes in which they suffered abuse. Without the stability of a safe and stable family or home, children are vulnerable to exploitation. That's why CSE's goal of alienating children from their parents is so catastrophic for society. Family breakdown is the root of most of South Africa's social ills, and this is true for every nation. Broken and dysfunctional families produce broken and dysfunctional people. And no government program or multi-million-dollar budget is capable of solving this problem. But what are the solutions? Well, first, we must acknowledge that family breakdown is the root cause of society's ills, and then focus our attention and efforts on restoring that basic unit. Sexual exploitation, abuse, and violent crimes against women and children are dreadful symptoms of a broken and dysfunctional society. Somebody said, as the family goes, so goes society. However, combating sexual exploitation, abuse, and violence against vulnerable women and children is a national effort in which government, civil society, the religious sector, business, the media, health, and education all partner to end this crisis. However, truth also determines the success of this noble battle. The truth about what actually contributes to family breakdown. What actually degrades and harms women and children? For example, is prostitution just sex work, like so many claim? Or is it the sexual enslavement of the most vulnerable among us? Is pornography just innocent fun, or the sexual degradation of women and children? Is sexuality education indoctrination and therefore child abuse? How you and I answer these fundamental questions will ultimately determine our success to end sexual exploitation and violence against women, because the truth shall make us free. In fact, the solution to these challenges are seated in the auditorium today and the people watching online. You and I are the change we're hoping for. If we have the courage of our convictions to speak truth to power and to work together for real change, we will shine the light of hope in every dark place. There are many powerful groups and agencies with vested interest in promoting sexual exploitation and abuse of women and the sexual indoctrination of innocent children. There's people making money out of this, large amounts of money, so they have vested interest. But what is proven to be more powerful than those motivated by ideology and greed are the people motivated by love and a conviction for the truth that leads to real freedom. And we are those people. There are millions more who hold the same convictions we do, but may not have access to the information we have and simply don't know what to do about it. Significantly, because the sexual rights movement is a global one, the movement to end sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual indoctrination must also be a global network, a truly global network. The success of the International Coalition Against Sexual Exploitation lies in the strength and the collaboration of the many activists and organizations represented in this room today, and the many more who could not join us for this vital summit for various reasons. But thankfully, technology allows us to meet virtually in our regions and across the world whenever necessary. Sharon Slater and Dawn Hawkins are two skilled leaders who have already developed international collaborations across several continents to promote synergy. I am part of those networks. I humbly propose then that the existing international pro-family networks be structured and aligned to streamline the communication channels to facilitate the easy sharing of information and successful strategies with all the members of this movement across the world. This more structured global alliance, in which the channels of communications are well defined, will help speed up our response to the many threats we face. What may improve our efforts is if Sharon Slater and Dawn Hawkins' already existing international networks are somehow linked to create one integrated and therefore effective global movement. Family Watch International and ICOSE must jointly empower NGOs in every country to collaborate and promote its core principles and objectives. One way we can mobilize is by meeting regularly and sharing information to provide updates on issues that threaten the health and safety and dignity of women and children, collaborate on areas of mutual benefit, and strategize for the future. The global movement to end sexual exploitation must strive to achieve the following objectives. 1, develop a broad global network of NGO partners to establish and maintain relationships beneficial to the vision and objectives of the global movement. 2, advance integrated domestic and international policies and action plans as a constructive rather than reactionary vision for what pro-life, pro-woman, pro-family societies should look like. Promote authentic pro-life, pro-family policies worldwide that protect and advance the safety and dignity of women and children through shared best practices, research-based strategies, and leveraged mutual strength. I am convinced that if we achieve these objectives, we will significantly improve and strengthen our work to end sexual exploitation and abuse in our respective countries and across the world. By pooling our resources and leveraging our shared strengths for the mutual benefit of all, we can and will take new ground for this necessary and noble cause. So in conclusion, I commend every man and woman assembled here today and across the world who give so much of their time and energy and resources, laboring sometimes in virtual anonymity to help liberate the most vulnerable among us, those robbed of their freedom and their dignity. Somebody said, a nation is judged by the way it treats the most vulnerable members of their society. By that criteria alone, South Africa and many nations of the world are failing dismally. A British statesman, Edmund Burke, said, and I quote, "All that is necessary for evil to prosper is that good people do nothing." You and I are doing something so that good can prosper in our nations and in the world. Let us do what we are doing even better so that good can prosper so much more. I know we can. Thank you very much.